TikTok's on the rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, David Wood. With me now is the man who authored the most violent book in the history of humanity. A book that is responsible for the deaths of more people than any other. The author is right here, hopefully to explain himself. How you doing, Robert?
Just great, David. Good to see you, sir.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, we were having a little bit of technical problems somewhere in the connection before we got started. We do not know if that's going to continue or if it's solved, but if we run into problems tonight, there might just be some problems with internet tonight, and so we'll wrap it up. But it looks like we're okay right now. Robert, we all know that Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance. We know that the fundamental guiding principle of Islam for 14 centuries has been Surah 2, verse 256. There's no compulsion in religion. Unfortunately, Islam is a weird religion in that the more people study it, the more they misunderstand it. And so there are always tons of people who misunderstand Islam, and they end up trying to violently subjugate the world. So that's basically what we do here in This Week in Jihad. We explain how people are misunderstanding Islam throughout the week. You got anything like that, Robert, where people are horribly misunderstanding Islam?
I'm sorry to say there's been quite a lot of misunderstanding this week, David, all over the world. And so we can begin with India, where excuse me.
Do you have a cold? Do you have a cold?
Not to my knowledge, but you never know.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I have a cold. I have a cold right now, and I just took a bunch of medicine to help me get through this show. But I was thinking, if you had a cold and I had a cold, the keyboard jihadi. You see, they've been cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I have been hearing from a lot of keyboard jihadis lately, many more than usual. I think they're upset about the critical Quran. I can't imagine why else they would be writing to me constantly, all the same things too. It's almost as if someone were centrally planning all of this harassment. But in any case, the keyboard jihadis are welcome to write to me. I'm always happy to hear from you. You can always try out your dawah on me, but it won't work. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. Terrible story out of India. Bilapuram Nagaraju, a Hindu gentleman, married a Muslim woman, Syed Ashrin Sultana, and he was publicly stabbed to death by enraged members of his wife's family over the past week. They were, of course, angry because a Hindu man is forbidden to marry a Muslim woman according to Islamic law as per the Quran. As you can read in chapter 2, verse 221, this translation is from the critical Quran. Do not marry idolatresses until they believe. For indeed, a believing slave woman is better than an idolatress, even though she pleases you. And do not give your daughters in marriage to idolaters until they believe. Now, this was the big mistake that this couple made. The man who was killed remained a Hindu and did not convert to Islam to marry this Muslim woman. Hence, he was considered to be an enemy of Allah and was put to death in a gruesome scene that was videoed. The video circulated widely throughout the week. Also in India, after this happened, the wife, now the widow of this man, Syed Ashrin Sultana, the poor woman whose husband was killed, she revealed, she said, before my marriage, my brother tried to kill me. He tried to hang me twice. My mother had warned us that my brother would kill us if we got married. And, well, she was not killed, but her husband was. And so that is one terrible story of jihad, straight out of the Islamic texts, justified by a passage in the Quran from this past week.
Yeah, another. If only Allah had been a little more clear in his speech, people wouldn't think that, Surah 2, verse 256 was abrogated and such.
Yeah, it's funny about 2256 because we hear so much about it in the West. And for those of you who may not know, although I can't imagine there's anybody in the world who doesn't know at this point, but Surah 2256 says there is no compulsion in religion. And yet, one of the things that we see running through Islam is compulsion, is force. And one of the primary aspects of 2256 is how many ways in which Islamic scholars have said that it is indeed abrogated. And one of the primary ones that I note in the Critical Quran actually is chapter 2, verse 193, which says, "Fight them until religion is all for Allah," which is, of course, a cognate verse repeated in chapter 8, verse 39. If you're going to fight until religion is all for Allah, you're going to get to a point where the people whose religion is not all for Allah are not going to want to convert. And then you still have this command from Allah to fight them. And consequently, there is compulsion in religion. And so you cannot, with any intellectual consistency, say that 256 is absolute, because then you are not fighting until religion is all for Allah. And if you are fighting until religion is all for Allah, then there's compulsion in religion. Does it contradict? Sure, but that's the way the Quran works.
Yeah, it's interesting. You pointed out all the different interpretations that you take up a commentary like Tafsir of Qurtubi, and you open it up, and he gives like a dozen different interpretations that Muslim scholars were using down to his time. And what's interesting is not one of them thought that it meant what Muslims today say that it means, right? Like the one thing it obviously didn't mean because it couldn't mean it because it would contradict everything else Allah revealed is that you just never fight and try to subjugate anyone. So it's interesting how they came up with different ways of reconciling it or saying it just applies in this situation or that it's abrogated or whatever. But it's just amazing that you get all the way down to the time of Qurtubi and no one thinks it means what Muslims in the West say it means today. And yet, according to many Muslims in the West today, that's the only thing it could possibly mean. And interesting how the methods of interpretation have changed over time. One quick question about the Critical Quran. Steve said, David, could you ask Robert when we'll get hard copy versions in the UK? I don't know if you have that information, Robert, but apparently they're looking for hard copies in the UK. You heard
I don't have specifics on it, but I do know that in general, I know from past experience, from past books, that it comes out in the United States and then becomes available in other countries within about a month. I hope that will hold true in this case, in which case you should be getting it within 2 or 3 weeks in the UK. We'll see. Nowadays, everything is so crazy. After all, the book itself was all ready and supposed to go in October, and Brandon took all the paper for whatever he needs paper for, and we couldn't get paper to print it until just this last few months, so that it only came out in last week. So I hope that it will be out soon in the UK. By past experience, we'll see if it holds this time.
Yeah, I just sent one to someone in Nigeria, so it'd be cool if someone in Nigeria got it before these guys in the UK got the hard copy. It was funny. A guy was complaining that he's just a poor seminary student in or college student and can't afford one in Nigeria. And I said, send me your address. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying that so that people can all say, David, send me a copy of the Quran, because that turned out to actually be hard to mail something to Nigeria. I had to get ID numbers and phone numbers and all this stuff for customs, because it's got to go through customs just to mail a book over there. Anyway, it was all interesting, but yeah, if you're watching, my Nigerian friend, let us know when you get that so we know everything works out sending stuff over to Nigeria.
I hope it gets there. I have been asked by Pakistanis in particular in the past to send them copies of my books, and I've obliged in the past, but then they never seem to arrive.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I was like, yeah, I'll send you one. I want to see if it actually gets there, right? It's Nigeria. It's not exactly a government that's terribly comfortable with information critical of Islam.
I hope there's not a Fulani postman, but in any case.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Egypt. In Egypt, there's been several things. I remember a few years back, I met this very nice Egyptian lady, and she said, "Do you realize the extent of the persecution of Christians in Egypt?" And I said, "Well, I cover it on a regular basis." She said, you don't have any idea if you're not there. Every day, in some way, Christians are threatened, harassed, subject to discrimination, any number of things. And it can be a simple thing of just walking down the street and getting insults, or standing in an elevator and being threatened. And so this is the kind of thing that happens in Egypt late in April. But the story just was reported this past week by International Christian Concern. Excuse me, maybe I do have a cold, David. A woman walked into a drugstore to buy some medicine. Now, this was still during Ramadan. Now, this was a Christian woman, and so she was not observing Ramadan. And so the pharmacist flew into a rage when he saw her, and he berated her for not observing Ramadan and for having her hair uncovered. And ultimately, after berating her, he slapped her, which is something that I'm told happens all too frequently in Egypt. But this is the kind of thing that Christians just have to endure, because the lady, Nevin Sobi, went to a police station to file a report, stayed there for many hours, from 9 p.m. until 3 a.m., giving statements, talking to police, and so on. And now she charges that the police actually falsified quotes that she gave them and that her mother gave them. And she describes her experience at the police station as yet another slap. Now, this is not a major incident, nobody's killed. I have another story out of Egypt of a young Coptic Christian, Rani Rafat, who was walking down the street, was shot 22 times and killed. And his family says, oh, this was Islamic jihadis. Nobody's dead in the other case, but this is the kind of small indignity, humiliation that Christians must endure on a regular basis in Egypt, because, of course, the Quran mandates that humiliation and says that the Christians must be made, non-Muslims must be made, the people of the book, to feel themselves subdued. And so this kind of thing, when Muslims do it, they consider themselves to be righteous and fulfilling the will of Allah.
And it's another situation where these things happen regularly in places like Pakistan and Egypt, and we only really hear about things in the news if it becomes like a mass attack, like a lot of people get killed. That's the only time we hear anything about it. Whereas if the situation were reversed, if it were a Muslim getting shot 22 times, or slapped or something like that, in a Western nation, it would be international news for like a week straight, and we'd still be hearing about it 10 years later and brought up as an example to show that it's not Islam that's violent, it's that, all ideologies have their radicals and so on. So, yeah.
And we'd be blamed, David.
Yeah, it'd be your fault. It'd be your fault. You wrote the Quran.
You got me there. Okay, speaking of not being able to talk about these things openly and honestly, we have a story out of Singapore. I believe you saw the Kashmir Files. I've not had an opportunity to see it yet. The story of the Jihad genocide of Kashmiri Pundits, the Kashmiri Hindus, in the 1990s. I have not, it's not playing anywhere that I can get to. So I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard a lot of great things about it. And I know that you saw it. In any case, it was banned in Singapore. And it was banned, this is a quote from the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth and the Ministry of Home Affairs. It said, these representations have the potential to cause enmity between different communities and disrupt social cohesion and religious harmony in Singapore's multiracial and multi-religious society. Now, of course, we've heard this song before. Every time there's something that tells unwelcome truths about Islam, then we hear that it will disrupt community harmony, which what we really know that that means is Muslims will get angry. Nothing else is going to happen. Nobody else will be violent in Singapore if this movie were shown. But we know many people are afraid Muslims will get angry. And so, all too often, non Muslims are willing to censor themselves in order to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, and I would be fine. I mean, not really. I would be more fine. I would be finer if there were some degree of consistency in all of this, right? Like if you're going to say, hey, this movie could, upset a lot of people and cause division. Okay, if that's your standard, then you should be banning something like the Quran. To be clear, I'm not in favor of banning the Quran. I'm saying if you're going to say, hey, this could stoke flames and, get people riled up against each other, well, what do you think, a book that calls for the violent subjugation of the world and, calls for fighting unbelievers until they pay the jizya and calls unbelievers the worst of creatures? What do you think about a book that does that? Oh, that's fine because that's, someone's religious book. But when that book causes the violent subjugation of people in an area, and those people in the area try to speak out against what's happened, is hey, you can't say anything about what happened to you. You got to keep your mouth shut because you might upset people if you tell what happened to you. Again, Robert, this would be like saying that Jews can't make movies about the Holocaust because it might upset people about what happened to them, might upset people against those Germans.
Yeah, and we can't have that. And
No.
so there has to be silence about it. Now, nobody would stand for that, nor should they. But when it comes to Islam and jihad, it's taken for granted in numerous circles. And really, this is akin to the unwillingness to draw Muhammad and all the big controversy that ensues if somebody wants to burn the Quran or draw Muhammad or do anything that is against Sharia blasphemy law. And there will be a huge crush of non-Muslims who are anxious to prevent this from happening. And they think that in doing so, they're keeping the peace. They don't realize the implications of their kowtowing to Islamic law and the fact that Islamic law is going to make a whole lot more demands upon them before it's through.
Yeah, and on things like cartoon contests and so on, you're right. The people think that if they silence criticism of Islam, mockery of Islam, and so on, they think that they're helping bring about peace in the long term when they're the ones perpetuating violence. Because if everyone just started criticizing Islam, the jihadis would just get used to it. There'd be nothing they could do about it. If 2 or 3 people draw cartoons about Muhammad, you can make them a target and kill them, which is what they do. It's what they did with the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists and so on. If tens of thousands of people do it, there's nothing you can do about it. If all of the media organizations started publishing cartoons of Muhammad, there would be 0 deaths over cartoons because the jihadis would look at that and say, there's nothing we could do about this. And anytime we try to kill someone over this, it just leads to more cartoons. So we need to stop this stuff. And so it's actually the people who marginalize all the critics who keep the violence going for forever.
That's it. You got it, man. And people don't realize this. It's incredible to me the rush to appease, when appeasement always emboldens the one being appeased. Anyway, speaking of which, we have a great deal more in line of dumb infidels, willful ignorance, refusal to acknowledge reality. These stories. You could just write out a template and change the names involved and the places and the date, but otherwise everything would be exactly the same.
I actually did that probably 7 or 8 years ago. I just made a template video where I would insert a name and then insert like the standard justificate Western, explaining it away and stuff like that. And then I could just splice in the latest attack, the name of the latest attack, and all the excuses for it, and so on. And it's pretty.
Well, that's funny. It. David. Mail this in. We could do a template this week in Jihad, And then every week there'd be, okay, here's the idiot infidel authority who's seeing somebody killing somebody while screaming Allahu Akbar. And then he says, we've ruled out terrorism and we're trying to figure out this guy's motive.
That would
It's such a place, such and such a date, just fill it in.
yeah, and we could so we could record the episode with all the gaps in it, and then we just have to basically name every country, make a video of ourselves naming every country in the world, and then naming all the different possible ways jihadis kill and slaughter people, and then the handful of stupid ways that people reinterpret what happened so that it has nothing to do with Islam. And then we could probably just have bots scan the daily news and then insert the relevant details in the standard template, and we wouldn't even have to be here. Our work would be done.
Yeah, I'd be in Tahiti drinking mojitos. Anyway, the latest here in the template is out of France, not surprisingly, Marseille. Mohammed El. They don't give the last name, but the first name's a bit of a tip-off here, David, I must say. Mohammed El said that he acted in the name of Allah when he stabbed a 40-year-old father 10 times. Where did he stab him, David?
I'm guessing neck.
You are correct, sir.
This is bad. See, this is bad, right? I had no idea. It's just, what does the Quran say? Oh, let me guess that one.
That's it. Anyway, Muhammad El, yes, he stabs this man 10 times in the neck outside of a Catholic school in Marseille. And he explained that he did it in the name of Allah. He told police, I did this in the name of Allah. And you know what they said? They put his remarks, they described what he said in explaining his actions as delusional remarks involving God and the devil. And so he has been sent for mental health evaluation. The Marseille official said the evidence collected does not allow at this stage to establish the motive. But after searching the home of the perpetrator, we can definitely rule out the terrorist hypothesis.
Definitely.
After all, he said he acted in the name of Allah. He stabs the man in the neck. What could that possibly have to do with terrorism?
Nothing
whatsoever. So that's France. Meanwhile, also in France, it seems as if there's a story like this every week. We have in France, let's see, where was this? Metz, France, which I think is near Yankees, France. Sorry. Metz.
Horrible.
Sounds like a German city to me, Metz. But in any case, France. Maybe it's one of those Alsace cities they took from the Germans. And the Germans deserved it. Don't get me wrong. I'm completely in favor of territorial losses after World War II. In any case, in Metz, a man named Kedam R. went into a cathedral holding a knife and screaming, according to the French report, Allah est grand, which I suspect is a translation of Allahu Akbar. And Allah is grand. In any case, Allahu Akbar, screaming, knife-wielding Muslim in a cathedral. And you're only going to hear about it here. Imagine, extrapolating from your remarks earlier, if a Christian with a knife had gone into a mosque and started screaming, Jesus is Lord. You and I might be answering to police now, you know? It would be totally our fault, and it would be all over the papers. There would be big feature stories about Islamophobia in France or wherever, all over CNN, and we would never hear the end of it. But this sinks like a stone.
Yeah, well, just to refute everything you say about Islam, Robert, have you heard of Anders Breivik? Busted. Busted. Anders Breivik.
I've been hearing a lot about Anders Breivik lately. I told you actually earlier this show that I've been hearing a lot from a lot of keyboard jihadis, and they love to bring Anders Breivik up because, of course, as is well known, and as they will never let anyone forget, Anders Breivik mentioned me many times in his manifesto. The So I think it necessary, since you mentioned him also, to note that Anders Breivik did quote me indeed, but he quoted many other people. But what is never mentioned by these people who invoke him are two salient details. One is that he actually expressed his disappointment in me for not calling for violence. And so when people try to say that I'm responsible for his violence, they leave that part out conveniently. And secondly, that he said that he was actually moved to violence by Al Qaeda.
Mm-hmm.
They had inspired him to be violent. So the Breivik you hear about from the establishment media is not actually the Breivik of reality, but that's the case in so many contexts.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and I made a video after his attack because his manifesto circulated. It was like 1,500 pages. I went through the entire thing, but only like the relevant portions where he's given like his biographical stuff, because some of it was like his daily routines and recipes and all sorts of stuff that was, irrelevant. So but I went through all of the parts that actually talked about how he decided to wage this attack. And what's interesting is he actually started planning the attack before anyone had ever heard of you or Pamela Geller or anyone like that. He started planning it in the late 1990s. He knew he was going to do. He knew he was going to do some sort of attack. And those are the guys who should scare people. The guys who sit there and say, hey, if I have to plan this for the next 15 or 18 years, I will. But I'm going to come up with a way to kill tons and tons of people. But in that manifesto, he explains growing up in an area where he saw Muslims in the area, attacking non-Muslims. He was started wondering why this was, so he started looking into the Muslim sources before anyone ever heard about you. But he said he was actually looking into the Quran and the Hadith, and then he decided he was going to get into politics to start, arguing about something, that could be done about what was going on there. And then he realized if he were to say anything about what was going on in that country, that he would simply be called a racist, which turns out if he wasn't at the beginning, he definitely was by the end. So I don't think you could hold that against people if they started calling that dude a racist. But the point was, he thought, hey, I'm going to go into politics to deal with this. But he concluded that any criticism of Islam would have him marginalized as a racist and shouted down. And so he concluded that politics and speech and any sort of discussion was a pointless waste of time because no one will ever listen. And that's when he said, but by watching Al Qaeda, that's where he concluded that the only way to break through this media's blockade of information is deadly shock attacks where you kill tons of people and then everyone has to go to your, the manifesto that you've posted. And so if you look at it, if you asked Anders Breivik, why did you do this? The answers you get are because of, Islamic violence against non-Muslims and confirmation in the Muslim sources and being constantly blocked by the media and politicians, any honest discussion of these issues, and then Al Qaeda actually showing me how to get my message across. Robert, or any of the rest of critics of Islam are not on this list of things that actually led up to his attack. And so it's just absolutely amazing that one of Anders Breivik's fingers that he's pointing is pointing directly at the media. You are the guys who silence all criticism of Islam and make me think that that discussion's a waste of time. There's no point in discussing this. See, Robert, you and I, we think that speech is the real way to get to the bottom of this and to do something about this. Breivik says no, it's a waste of time, and his fingers are pointed at politicians and journalists. And if you listen to politicians and journalists after the attack, their fingers are all pointing at people like you. You see what Robert Spencer did?
Well, David, it was useful. It was useful for them because now they have an all-purpose way to dismiss me and others. Anything that we say, they just say Breivik. Audrey Truschke is a professor at Rutgers, and she has written about how wonderful Muslim rule in India was. Well, in my book, The History of Jihad, I go to the primary sources and show that Muslim rule in India was actually quite brutal and bloody. And so people sometimes send her things mentioning me, and invariably she just sends back, "Oh, Anders Breivik." So it's an easy, lazy way out to avoid having to deal with uncomfortable facts for these people. Anyway, speaking of uncomfortable facts, David, do you remember Momina Shoma?
That name sounds familiar.
She is a native of Bangladesh who moved to Australia. And a few years back in Australia, she was there on a student visa and staying in a home of a gentleman named Roger Singaravelu, who was napping on the porch with his 5-year-old daughter.
Oh,
And she,
1 second. Is this the girl that went to prison?
yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Yes. All right. All right. I got it.
Screaming. What was she screaming, David?
My money is. I just remember the name, but I'd be guessing like Allahu Akbar.
That's right.
Two for
For
two.
$100.
2 for 2.
Now, she stabbed Roger Singaravelu in where?
Uh, I'm going three for. I'm trying to go 3 for 3 now, but I'm going with neck.
Neck is correct for $500.
Hey, we should
Anyway,
we should do a mock game show where. And what did he yell? What did he yell when?
and have the AP correspondent saying, "What did he yell?" Let's see. Trump. Trump is the real president.
Mm-hmm.
What did he yell? White supremacy? No, sorry. Anyway, Momina Shoma is back in the news because this woman who was in prison in Australia, Kaylee Mitz is her name. She says she knew Momina Shoma. She says we weren't overly friendly with each other, but I was kind to her. When she got let out, I would say good morning and ask her how she was doing. And so one day, as Kaylee Mitz was reclining in the common area reading a novel, Momina Shoma calmly walked in. This is a low security unit, armed with gardening shears that she had hidden away in her hijab. And she took out the gardening shears. Kaylee Mitz recounts, I asked her what she was doing. Then she started swinging them around, and then she raised them up. She was looking at me in my eyes, and she brought them down and tried to stab me. Her eyes were just black, and she was just staring at me, and she looked like she was possessed. Interestingly enough, she says later, she was just looking at me, and she was smiling. Momina Shoma herself says, I'm trying to find it here. I can't find it. Oh, there it is. The stupid girl just, I don't know what she does. She falls off the couch and runs away outside. Loser, coward, just stop so that I can kill you. I would have killed her, stabbed her to death. That was my intention. If I get released, I'll do it again. Now, what on earth could be moving Momina Shoma to do this, to try to kill this person randomly, and to vow that she would do it again if she got let out?
One of life's great mysteries.
It is indeed. No, indeed.
No, indeed.
But the funny thing about Momina Shoma also is that, of course, she's not going to get anything in prison that would actually help her to stop behaving the way she's behaving. What she needs, if prison officials had any courage, and they don't, is someone to come in, like you, David. Yeah, she needs somebody to come in and show her why Islam is not true. And she, when she was sentenced for the stabbing of her landlord, she said, "This is great. Allah is going to be pleased with me." Now, the only way to get to that is to show her that there is no Allah to be pleased with her, and that the whole thing is a lie.
Yeah,
But
I mean, think about
nobody is going to do this.
yeah, think about how easy it is to solve this problem. These young people who decide to go out and slaughter unbelievers in the name of Allah, they've been given a case for why Islam is true that they never hear responses to, right? I mean, they'll be told the Quran has been perfectly, miraculously preserved right down to the letter. It's filled with miraculous scientific insights. Muhammad is the greatest man who ever walked the planet. He performed all these miracles. I mean, he was shooting water out of his fingers. It's all so clear. It's indisputable. Muhammad was prophesied in the Bible so many times, Old Testament and New Testament, and this book that is so clearly and indisputably the inspired, preserved, authoritative Word of God commands you to slaughter unbelievers in the name of Allah. And then people go out and slaughter unbelievers in the name of Allah. And then the only thing people ever do, the authorities ever do, that journalists ever do, that politicians ever do in response is deny that second part. They'll say, no, it doesn't call for the violent subjugation of the world, when it indisputably and obviously and clearly does. You have to massively twist the text to get something peaceful out of that book. But notice how easy it would be. It is massively easier to say, hey, you've been told perfect preservation right down to the letter. Here are a bunch of manuscripts right in your face and with differences circled, that any idiot can say, hey, even if you don't speak Arabic, you can say, okay, that word is not the same as this word. Okay, those are differences. Okay, so I was lied to. And then, you could go through every argument that they were ever given for Islam, at which point they're either going to realize, wait a minute, everything I believed in Islam for was a total lie. I was duped into following this, in which case they're going to leave Islam. Or even if they remain Muslim, because many Muslims will remain Muslims when they're exposed to all of this information that they didn't have, they're not going to be as confident in going out and slaughtering people in the name of Allah. So either way, if you were to actually bombard them when they get to prison or any camp that they're sent to, or a refugee camp or whatever, if you were to give them information exposing all the lies that they've been told, look, they either leave Islam, in which case problem solved, or they aren't as confident about slaughtering people, in which case problem solved. And so either way, problem solved. And it's the one thing that no one will ever do. So the one thing that would actually work and is guaranteed to work is the one thing we'll never do. Instead, we'll do this other thing that will never, ever work. And that's all we'll do, because that's the tolerant way that keeps leading to endless death.
They reinforce the very ideology that got the people there in prison to start with. Momina Shoma, I guarantee you, she was given a Quran in prison. And she's probably been sitting there reading the Quran for hours every day. And then she comes out and tries to kill this woman. What a surprise. I'm sure the Australian authorities are searching for a motive right now.
Oh, and by the way, Robert, since I have, now this isn't an Islamic prison, but I can tell you from experience, being in prison, because I had Bibles and a Quran, and when the correctional officers, the COs come and do searches. They make everyone open up their stuff and they dig through all your stuff. They're looking for weapons, they're looking for drugs, and so on. When they start digging through your stuff, they'll grab your Bible and flip through all the pages and shake it and stuff to see if there's any weapons or any drugs hidden in there. And when they get to the Quran, they see a Quran, they go, okay, and they stand back and they say, could you open your Quran and flip through the pages for me? They're already terrified. They're already terrified of upsetting a Muslim. And this was in the 90s, right? This was in the 90s. This is before 9/11 and all this woke stuff.
Well, that's in the Quran. I forget the chapter and verse number, but Only the clean can touch it. And I remember encountering that many times. And one time, Mahdi Bray, who was a guy with the Council on American Islamic Relations and other unsavory groups, he came to a talk I gave and got up during the question period and asked a question that was completely ridiculous. He said, I'm just a simple country Muslim and I've never heard of this Islam you're talking about. And I thought, oh, yeah, you've never heard of Osama bin Laden and 9/11? This was in like 2002 or 3. And anyway, afterward, though, I kind of inadvertently got him very angry because I had an Arabic Quran with me that had been given to me as a gift from someone who had brought it over from a Middle Eastern country, and I was showing it off and handling it and showing people, see, isn't this a beautiful edition? And look how it's bound and so on. And then I glanced up and I saw Mahdi Bray there, and he was just steaming. And I realized, it's because I'm an unbeliever and I'm handling the actual Quran. But there were too many people around for any jihad to happen there. Anyway, speaking of intimidation, actually, in the city of Cologne in Germany, they put up in mid-April a Armenian genocide memorial. And then 4 days later, they dismantled it. Obviously, they were afraid of, once again, offending the Muslims who would be outraged that attention was being called to atrocities and violence that were committed in the name of Islam.
Now that one's actually, that's even more parallel. That's even more parallel to, the genocide in Germany. And actually, weren't those connected? Isn't that what, like,
yes,
I've read that was what showed Hitler, that Hitler learned the lesson from the Armenian genocide, that you can actually slaughter mass populations of people while the world does nothing about it and get away with it.
Yeah, there's a famous quote from Hitler, "Today, who remembers the Armenians?" And it was very clear. Actually, some people think that the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who lived in Berlin during World War II, gave Hitler the idea that mass killing was feasible and even desirable. But that is something that is disputed. In any case, there's no doubt that he was there.
So just to clarify, Robert, let me make sure I got this correct. So someone put up a monument about the the victims of the Armenian genocide in Germany, where Hitler sort of copied that against Jews, but then Germany decided that you can't have this because it would offend and maybe get a violent rise out of the people who were responsible for the Armenian genocide, which led ultimately to him doing it against the Jews.
Yes,
right?
That's quite right.
Okay, just want to make sure I had that right because it sounded insane in my head.
It's quite insane, David. We live in an age of insanity. Speaking of insane, actually, we have a story out of France about a Muslim migrant from Afghanistan who first went to Sweden, but his behavior in Sweden was so egregious that he was expelled from Sweden, which is very difficult.
And yeah, they burn places to the ground up there, and that doesn't get them kicked out.
Exactly. So this guy must have been totally out of control. And what did he do when he was expelled from Sweden? Of course, he went to France. In France, at the age of 22, he approached a 9-year-old boy, and I'll spare you the gory details, but he sexually assaulted the 9-year-old boy. And then he went to the boy's mother, and he said, if you give me 10,000 euros, I will not go to the police. But she refused, went to the police, and interestingly enough, when on trial, he began to weep. This is the perpetrator, not the victim. And he said, "My life is already destroyed." And his lawyer said that really he comes from the chaos in his country. You have to take into account the cultural difference. Now, what's the cultural difference?
I thought there was none.
Obviously, that's right. Yes, we're always told that it's a terrible thing to think that there would be any significant cultural difference or any cultural difficulty in bringing over large numbers of people from Afghanistan. But obviously, she was referring, his lawyer that is, to the fact that it is quite common in Afghanistan for adult males to have sexual partners who are young boys. And this is known as bachabazi. It's a very common thing. Truck drivers take little kids along with them on their long trips, and everyone knows that this is a sexual relationship. This is based, of course, on these passages in the Quran, chapter 56, 11 to 18, and I will quote once again from the critical Quran: "Those are the ones brought near in the gardens of pleasure, a company of the former peoples and a few of the later peoples, on thrones woven, reclining on them, facing each other. There will circulate among them young boys, made eternal, with vessels, pitchers, and a cup from a flowing spring." Now, of course, many Islamic apologists in the West will say, "See, look, they have cups and vessels. They're just waiters. Don't go crazy, you Islamophobe. They're just waiters." Another passage, however, is a little bit more over the line, chapter 76, 17 to 20. "And they will be given to drink a cup whose mixture is of ginger, a fountain within paradise named Salsabil. There will circulate among them young boys made eternal. When you see them, you would think them scattered pearls. And when you look there, you will see pleasure and great dominion." Obviously, these passages come within the context of also the fabled virgins of paradise, hence also concern that this is giving validation to the idea of sex with young boys. In any case, that's how many Afghan men understand it, and men elsewhere as well in the Islamic world.
Yeah, there's also an epidemic in Pakistan of young boys being molested, and I know a woman who lived in the same building with. There were several Pakistani men who lived in the building, and there was a common area where she would get into discussions with them and so on, and it eventually led to these guys, talking about things they went through in their childhood and so on, and one of them said something about being molested when he was young, but he didn't think twice about it. It wasn't that he was bothered by it, and she was actually bothered by it. So she started asking, and then eventually she somehow went around the room to the other guy, and they'd all been molested when they were little, and none of them thought there was anything strange about it. And so she started asking them about that, and it turns out that they don't view it as homosexual if it's a prepubescent boy. If it's a boy before puberty, they don't think you're gay for having sex with him. If he's gone past puberty and then you have sex with him, then you're gay. Then we need to you need to be executed and stuff like that. That's what they do. But as long as it's a boy, they just they look past it and act like nothing's wrong when it's pretty disgustingly widespread.
And this kind of thing is given this justification by these boys like scattered pearls in the Quran. Okay, a lot of stories, of course, out of Africa, where, as you have noted before, there is the fault line between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. Wherever that fault line appears, there is ongoing violence. And so we have several stories out of Nigeria: 21 Christians slaughtered, thousands displaced in an attack in the Middle Belt region, 9 people killed in other jihad raids on villages in the Chibok local government area of Borno State. In Nigeria, Muslims, what were they screaming, David?
I'm gonna go with, it's just a guess, shot in the dark, Allahu Akbar.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. Really, you're on a roll
I'm
tonight.
way more of a prophet than Muhammad ever was.
That's right. And in the backdrop of all this, we have also the same playing the victim and intimidation. Now, I think this is extraordinary, David, because I just noted 21 Christians killed in one place, 9 people killed in another, 8 people killed in a third. I believe there was another, I don't have it open, maybe it was last week, 142 killed at one place. But while all this is happening, meanwhile, there's a controversy at the National Open University of Nigeria, which is called NOUN, National Open University of Nigeria, because they scheduled exams on a Friday. And so a Muslim group issued a statement. For those who may be wondering what is wrong if Muslim students and staff are made to take examinations during the Jumu'ah period on Friday, that is the period of the midday prayer and the sermon, it is akin to compelling Christian students and staff to write examinations on Sunday mornings. This cannot be acceptable to Nigerian Christians, and it is for the same reason that it is a taboo among Muslims, and anybody who forces them to do it is regarded as standing between them and their freedom to worship Allah Almighty. It is not only outrageous, repulsive, and detestable, it is anti-Muslim and neo-imperialist. It smacks of articulated religious fanaticism. Why do you hate Muslims so much? What have we done to deserve this? We demand an unreserved apology from Noun for the infringement which occurred on these 2 days, and subjecting Muslim candidates and staff to immeasurable psychological trauma which affected their performance during the exams. And furthermore, we demand the cancellation of all examination papers scheduled for this coming Friday. Now, okay, sure, don't schedule the exams on Friday afternoon if you have a lot of Muslim students. I got no problem with that. But the idea that this is some terrible act of hatred, I doubt that the Muslim students that issued this statement have ever said that about the practically daily jihad killings of non-Muslims in Nigeria.
Hey, Robert, have you heard of this term, a Karen? Have you heard of it? A Karen?
I believe so.
Have you heard of that one? It's like a slang term because like people come up with these new terms like and I have to ask my son. So this is like last year, and I'm like, "Hey, someone just called me a Chad. What is that?" And I go, "Don't worry about it. It's good." Right? It's like, "Oh, okay."
Right. Karen is bad. I actually had this woman I knew named Karen write me a few months ago and say, thank you for not using this word Karen. And I said, sure, because, I haven't really paid attention, but it's apparently some sort of a harridan who enforces rules to the irritation of everyone around her.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've never seen any official definition, but the times I've actually seen someone called a Karen, it's usually like an entitled like white woman who's like calling the cops because someone annoyed her or something like that, and I think that's what it is. But it kind of reminds me of what people do when their feelings get hurt over something about Islam, like it's this horrible issue and matter of fact, I've seen it. I was in a hotel one time, and I just saw this lady just flipping out at the desk clerk over nothing. Like, call the manager, and she's like, "Sorry, my manager's not here." Well, I'm calling the police. Like, you're calling the police because she hurt your feelings, right? And so there are people who just lose their mind. There are people who just lose their mind over stuff like that. But the description of the description of them reminds me of like when someone schedule something on a Friday or something like that, or during Ramadan, people flip out, it's the end of the world, my goodness, what are we going to do about this? And it's like, okay, well, we agree, you might want to suggest it, but don't act like this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to someone, and we all need to be in a state of panic because of the persecution against you.
Indeed.
No indeed.
No, indeed. Kind of an unusual story. out of Italy that I wanted to get in here before we close. An imam from Morocco was actually jailed for confining his wife to their home, depriving her of all freedom of movement, and beating her when she tried to rebel. Now, we've talked about wife beating many times. It's justified in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 34, and so on. But this imprisoning the wife in the home, the story, the news story that reports this is not any more specific about what the wife is supposed to have done. And so this is a little known aspect of Islamic law I thought I'd shed a little light on. There are two possibilities. One is that she is suspected or guilty of unlawful sexual activity, zina, which could be adultery, but it could also be just essentially the suspicion of adultery. In the Quran, chapter 4, verse 15, this is also an abrogated passage, however, but it says, "As for those of your women who are guilty of lewdness, call to witness 4 of you against them. And if they testify, then confine them to their houses until death takes them." Now, this is generally understood to have been superseded by the stoning passages, which are not in the Quran at all. And as the Caliph Umar explains, they were in the Quran, they've been removed, but he hopes that nobody will get the impression because of that we shouldn't be stoning adulterers and the like. So that may have been why, although in that case, probably it's more likely she would have been stoned to death. It's also possible that she left Islam. And many people are aware that there's a death penalty for leaving Islam, but actually, the Hanafi school of Islamic jurisprudence teaches that for a woman, that she is imprisoned rather than killed, and that she should just be held confined in some space until she repents. And if she doesn't repent, then she just stays there for the rest of her life.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, when you're reading the description about what happened to the woman, it sounds like exactly what you would get from the Muslim sources. You know, the banish them to beds apart and beat her and so on. But I've also seen that since the contract between a man and a woman is an exchange, he provides for her food and so on, and she provides for him, her private parts. That's what she gives. That's what she brings to the table in the exchange. That you can't cut off her food if she's not doing what you want. And so it doesn't have to actually be something terribly bad or extreme. I mean, Surah 4 verse 34, if you simply fear rebellion or disloyalty or something like that on the part of the woman, you can start dishing out some pretty harsh penalties to make sure she doesn't get out of line.
Indeed.
No, indeed.
No, indeed. A group, I guess it'll be the last one for this week, but a group in Yemen stormed into a mosque during prayers, assaulted the imam, and dispersed the crowd. Do you think a bunch of white supremacist Islamophobes somehow made it to Yemen and attacked a mosque, David? What do you think?
They must have. There's no other explanation.
There's no other group that could possibly have done this. But actually, it was a Sunni mosque, and the people who stormed it during the prayers were Shiites from the Houthis, who are, of course, the famous Iran-backed rebel group that are launching rockets into Saudi Arabia from Yemen as part of the Sunni Shiite Jihad. They stormed a mosque in the Al-Udain countryside, assaulted the mosque's imam, Abdullah al-Hakami, and riddled the mosque's internal walls with bullets, injuring some of the worshippers. Sunni Shiite Jihad, 1,400 years old. Very little remarked upon in the West, even though I believe, as we noted last week, it came to the United States recently with a jihad plot against a Shiite mosque in Chicago that the Council on American Islamic Relations took the opportunity to denounce Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment, and then it turned out that the perps were Sunnis who hated Shiites.
Yeah, and that was actually planned violence, but people don't realize it's actually a bit more common even in the West for people to show up to the events of the other group and wage a kind of counter protest. Because I remember in New York there was some sort of Shia holiday, and there was a group called Revolution Muslim who were sort of
I
extremist,
remember.
yeah,
Yes.
extremist Sunnis who are sort of going along parallel with them on the other side of the street, hurling abuse at them and so on. So, yep, lots of hostility right here that goes right back to that first generation of Muslims that Muhammad said was the best generation.
Yes. And was certainly one of the most violent. Actually, I remember a recent story out of the University of Connecticut of a Shiite student group at the university getting a gift from Iran of sacred soil from one of the holy sites, maybe in Qom. And, the Shiites use that for the prostrations. They don't prostrate on the cold, hard ground, they prostrate on the sacred soil that they've got from somewhere. But Sunnis came into the student center, the Islamic Student Center, and tossed them into the trash. And there was a controversy ongoing about that.
Yeah, no compulsion though, so we're good.
No, indeed.
No, indeed. No, indeed. I want to get a T-shirt made that just says "No, indeed" and put it for sale. Hey, no, indeed, and then you could quote. It could have the Quran reference underneath. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, there's always more that could be said, but when we limit ourselves to an hour, we cover what we've covered here has been This Week in Jihad. As we've mentioned, if you don't have a copy of the Critical Quran, you want to get it. The link is in the description box. That's for America. You might have to, go to a different site or somewhere, or something, if you're in a different place. But those of you who are in the U.S. definitely want to grab a copy of that and the History of Jihad as well. Both those links are in the description box. All right. Any final thought here, Robert?
I think that that could be the This Week in Jihad T-shirt. No,
Yeah.
indeed.
No, indeed. Yeah. Yeah, we got to get them. We got to make some. We got to make some
Get
no
your This
indeed
Week in
t-shirts. We'll have
Jihad.
people say it in response to everything, but mean, but always when you mean yes. And, hey, it's an awesome conversation starter. Someone says something and you agree with it, and you say no indeed instead, and they go, What are you talking about? Why'd you say no indeed?" You go, "Oh, because Allah's the best communicator ever, and that's how He responds to stuff." So
I'm just trying to be clear.
there we go. Clear as day. Clear as day. All right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And there can always be miracles, and maybe this will be the week where we don't have any jihad before next week. But you know, there comes a point when you say, okay, for 14 centuries straight, it's been one way every single week, and therefore I have a good suspicion what's going to happen by next week. Sadly, so we'll see you then.